Well, just a little preface. Tonight's talk is held in conjunction with the solo exhibition Ignition, Recent Works by Jason Stout, which features over 50 works, charcoal drawings, and vividly colorful oil paintings that are produced by the artist just within a short, actually, 4 or 5 year time frame. And the show will be on view through February 17th. So you can still come to the Clarion Eagle Gallery. There's still time to visit the exhibition in person, masked and socially distanced, of course. Jason Stout received his BFA in studio art from the University of Tennessee at Martin in 2001, and an MFA in painting from the University of Texas at San Antonio in 2004. Stout's work visually deals with elements of formal and figurative abstraction while exploring such themes as power, history, and identity, especially through the guise of Southern culture. His work exists in several private and public collections, including the University of West Georgia, Jacksonville State University, and the University of Tennessee at Martin. During his career, he has participated in several solo exhibitions, as well as several group exhibitions. He currently serves as the professor of art at the University of Tennessee at Martin and is represented by REM Rim Gallery in San Antonio, Texas, and Certitious Succession Gallery in Memphis. Stout was named the TAEA Higher Education Art Educator of the Year for 2015-16 and Best of Show at the Art of the South in 2016. It's an award that he notably has. He's also the recipient of the 2017-2018 Ray and Wilma Smith Award for Creative Research and the 2019 UTAA Outstanding Teacher Award. His work has been featured in a recent New American Paintings exhibition and print catalog, and he even has a few upcoming exhibitions in 2021. And that's not an easy feat during our current COVID situation, where many exhibits have been canceled or postponed. So I will now turn the presentation over to our visitor. So please welcome Jason Stout. Jason, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, guys. I'm going to try this share screen thing here, and hopefully I won't botch it. We've not been able to get the exact format that we want, but we're going to get close. And what I would like to do is I'm going to go through this. Thanks for T Mike for running through in that great introduction. I've been fortunate enough to get some of these awards that he talked about. I don't think, however, I've ever won any accolades for PowerPoint presentations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this and talk, and I will look a little bit off screen because I have my monitor here, which actually has the camera, and I have the big screen here. And after doing 2 classes today, it's easier for me to read the big screen. So what I'm going to do is go through this kind of quick. The work is an accumulation of all this stuff, and the speed of the work moves kind of fast. And I found that when I get in the headspace talking about this work, I tend to talk a little bit fast anyway. There's a little bit of the excited Southerner in me, so I will try to slow down and pull back. Sometimes there will be text in this. So if I get going too quick, you can read along with me. I also do this so it triggers certain things that I want to remember in the talk. But what I'm really interested in afterwards, which I hope if anybody's here that wants to stick around and talk, is questions from people, artists, students, general people that have went and seen the exhibition, talking about and answering questions about it, and talking about too, if anybody wants to talk about the art landscape now with trying to show and exhibit and make work and all that. I'd love to talk about that, just artist to artist. So I think what Mike and I decided was that we could either do it like this. I mean, we've kind of had a nice, good, and back and forth sharing with talking. Through this, it might be a little bit trickier now because there's more people in the room. But if we wanted to go through a chat and do a Q&A afterwards, or if we want to like use the chat and then pull somebody up and then let them mic up so we could kind of dialogue through a question or something, I think that would be great. So hopefully you can see the screen. I don't see anybody freaking out like they can't. So I'll go through. And like Mike said, this is a body of work that I started in the mid-fall of 2015 through 2019. And I'll kind of talk about how it started. And I'll talk about why this body of work stopped at a certain point and is now at Murray State and how that came to be. Let me see if I can click it like this. There we go. And that's a nice picture of me, and that's some of my information. And if you have any questions about anything or want to see some more of the images, uh, my website is thejasonstout.com. My web designer, Rachel Melton, is actually on here. I think I saw her a while ago. She set this up and works with me. She takes my images. She's organized this site. And if you are an artist looking to work with somebody that does a really good job on an artist website, feel free to contact Rachel Melton. She does a great job. And the work is actually organized on the site in chapters of when I made them by blocks and years through media between painting and drawing. So you can look through that. I'll talk a little bit about different kind of mindsets and modes that I go in when I'm trying to get in the mindset of making body of works with where I started with before I made the work that's in the Ignition exhibition and what I'm kind of thinking about. So I talk a little bit about postmodernism and thinking about it. And some of the initial ideas of this is that it's a challenge to modernism, uses simplification and appropriation mainly from past styles, utilizes high and low art, usually from consumer and popular culture, and common themes in postmodernism include identity, class, gender roles, power, consumerism, and globalism, which if you've seen the show, these are all things that I tend to address. Why I'm having such a hard time changing modes there. There we go. I'm also struggling or tackling the problem of trying to make pictures in a modern age. And if anybody knows the history of theoretical painting, died somewhere back in the late 60s and early 60s, and that everything that we're making now is somehow a recycled permutation of what happened before, but that our works now that we make have to be indicative of talking about the age that we live in now. And I think that's a very important feature of contemporary art, is trying to address the nowness of the world that we're living in. There are usually two types of painters, and I hate to break them down because there's always exceptions to this, but we have painters that create works that stay within the realm of the abstract methodology with almost no recognizable subject matter, just elements of design. And then there are picture makers that use elements of narrative and storytelling, usually have recognizable subject matter, at least in parts, and also use elements of pure painting to make their work informed by art history, which means you have elements of abstraction, you have elements of narrative painting, whether historical or modern, whether abstract or semi-abstract. And I tend to be more of a picture maker. I have moments in my paintings where I allow for abstract moments or things or decisions with colors and design to be a big part of the picture, whether it coincides with the narrative or not, because it's a good thing for the painting. And I still consider myself in a lot of different ways a storyteller. I am from the South, I am from Tennessee. We are part of an oral tradition that is a big part of our culture, and storytelling and myth especially, that's part of that. So that's something that I utilize when I think about my work. Now, when I started to come up with the idea of making these cloud compositions from 2015, there are certain things that which I was trying to respond to as an artist at that time. I wanted to work with ideas that focused on identity, power, class, consumerism, and culture. These seem to be the things that I was interested in my own life personally, biographically, the things that I tended to disseminate the most. I like thinking about mythology, folktales, Southern folklore, the news, current events, and American history as ingredients for my work. I find, especially in the times that we live in now, not only do we live in times that seem to have the utmost newness to them, but also too, we're living in times that really recycle so many things that we've seen in the past. And the continuity of those two things seemingly stacked on top of each other sometimes just kind of wow me. Formally, like I talked about, I'm a picture maker. I use elements of recognizable subject matter, semi-abstraction, saturated color, and lowbrow art. I feel like saturated color in my palette is not something that's there for, say, a pictorial sweetness, which is, if anybody's a painter, having another painter call your painting sweet or saying they're sugary is not always a great thing. But it's the fact that there is a nowness in the amount of images that people see through television, computer screens, optics, things being sent through their phone, that have to feel for me a little bit more electric to get into the visual language in which people are seeing on a daily basis. I find that some of the older kind of stylistic tendencies and processes that are in historical paintings stay very much historically in their place because their formal identity seems dated. And I'm trying to use some dated things. I have influences and things that are important that guide me in my work, but also too, I'm using a high saturated palette a lot of the time to respond to that. And I'm always in a conflict pictorially with the idea of Renaissance depth versus flat space, specifically the push and pull of the picture plane. And this gets into a compositional challenge when I was dealing with these paintings that I try to hit head on. Now, the paintings I was doing right before this, the show before I started making the cloud paintings, was a show called Interiors and Exteriors. And what I had basically done is I'd been doing figurative narrative work since grad school. So from about 2001 up until about 2012 or 13, to where I got into this series of paintings where I wanted to really just think about the surrounding areas that I'm putting my characters in, whether it was a landscape or whether it was in a room. And to do that and really think about the space and develop those areas, I wanted to take all the characters for the most part out. So I wanted to think about how to advance my environments. And to do that, I really needed to strip all the figures out and just get them out of the way to just see the places. I found in doing that, I could really attack certain kind of issues that I was thinking about, where characters really didn't have to be a big part of it, that I could subtly sneak in little points of narrative that might inform things that I was thinking about. So this is one of the exteriors. This is Leaning Derrick's Sunset Oil on Canvas. It's a 12 by 12 inch painting from 2015. And we see a mountain landscape here with an oil derrick with a little borehole right here, and with a ground with a small path, which is a very simple kind of everyday kind of picture device here with a path that's coming out, and with the top layer of the ground pulled back here to reveal shale rock on top of a water source that is sitting just beneath the top part of the soil there. Part of where I got this sidewalk or this path from was not just a general kind of picture thing, but it was at the end of the trial of the Trayvon Martin death in 2012, where being bombarded with a lot of images from the time, one eerie image that I kept coming up with or seeing was this sidewalk image. And part of looking at the path and the darkness of this image and thinking how ominous and scary the path was moving forward out of an event like this was something that kind of stuck with me. The other thing that started to happen around the end of the trial and everything that went along with this is that my wife became pregnant with our son, who's 6 now. But it really got me thinking about what it was like just to be a father and to raise a son or a kid in this world. We didn't know he was going to be a son at the time, but later on we did, and it kind of resonated with me even more. And that Trayvon Martin himself looked like a lot of students that I had in my first year foundation classes. And then also too that one day soon that my son would be 16 walking down a path at night, hopefully by his home or somewhere close. And this was a situation that happened to him. And then how in this time that we were so close to something that just seemed so impossible that could happen in our culture, but that we're seeing is really not that impossible. So it was something that I was worried and thinking about. And it was part of the image that I took with me into some of these landscapes. The other part of the landscape that I was dealing with too is outside of just the personal kind of politics and social things that were going on with my response to the Trayvon case, was the idea of fracking and the information that was coming out about it at the time, particularly in how the fracking process, which seemed at first something that was packaged as safe and cleaner, was something that could be really detrimental over time to our water source, which we were already in doubt of or had problems with at the time before this came about. So we were starting to see problems with fracking going on at the same time underneath these landscapes. And the danger to the water sources in the areas in which this was happening was starting to become pretty apparent. So in doing these landscapes, I was trying to combine two modes of thought into one thing, dealing with this idea of this path with what I was thinking about being an upcoming father, and dealing with my thoughts and feelings about this case. And then also dealing with what is it like to try to make a new version of the Great American Landscape? When I was talking about these originally, I just said, think post Mario Brothers meets Thomas Hart Benton versus the end of both. And that's really what I was thinking about, is that how much of the landscape that I was making in my semi-abstraction reminded me of games that I played as a kid, especially Super Mario Brothers 3, which was a beautiful game, although I wasn't really looking at images of it when I was designing these. But also too, how this sidewalk image from this image stayed with me and worked its way into almost all of these landscapes moving forward. And also too, the idea of pulling out the foreground of this to talk about this issue with how I was thinking about hydraulic fracturing or fracking as it invaded these landscapes and man started to leave his mark. I was also doing interiors at the time, which were dealing with personal content or narrative that I was coming up with or going through my own life, dealing with personal narrative. And this is Memento Mori Backroom Glory from 2015. So this was part of the same show, Interiors and Exteriors. And in here I have a skull and beer cans, which, beer cans are kind of crumpled up or a kind of like a lowbrow way of doing impromptu, really quick engaged sculpture. I've just always thought that at the end of having a beer, manipulating and moving it around was a way of kind of doing it. But they're also too, when you fold them up, they're also inherently very cubist, which I like cubist painting. I like a lot of that early modernism. So the idea of having that on top of a book, on top of a round table with a floor where the perspective doesn't quite make sense, with a pack of cigarettes and bullets sitting on the table, the light bulb back here, and then some kind of silhouetted crime event like a domestic thing happening in the background also going on. I'm a big fan of like a lot of different painting. And so this for me was kind of a nod to one of my favorite painters too, is Peter Clay's Still Life of Skull and Writing quill from Oil on Wood 9x14 from 1628. In these Vanitas paintings that Claes was doing at the time, it was dealing with the temporary notions of life and how life is fleeting and it's only here for a short time. And so I was kind of doing a nod to that, but replacing some of the things that were in this picture with things that were, in my life at the time, or that symbolized other things that were more immediate that ended or that got to the end of things, such things as vice or violence or things like that. And also in a lot of these still lifes, there were windows that alluded out to where you could see the landscape paintings that were partnered with the show. Now, leading out of these paintings, part of the thing that I was really wanting to get to was some kind of new frame or construction to do my images. The problem you have with a canvas, if you're doing a very traditional way, is that the strengths become the weaknesses. Carol Dunham said something about paintings once, is that all the problems with paintings are the best things about them, that they're so flat, they're so square, they're so rectangular, they're so boring. That's also the best thing about them, is that you've got to find a way to do something great out of those limitations. Peter Saul also said one time that one of the cool things about paintings is that you're basically using the same tools that people used to make paintings 300 or 400 years ago, with a few exceptions, but it's basically the same thing. You're pushing around pigmented dust or liquid in a sequence of moves that are stacked or layered that dry at different times in a way in which to make something meaningful that somebody sees for the most part on a two-dimensional plane. There was some certain problems though that I was trying to find to get around that were trying to advance my figurative paintings. One is that, in a narrative painting, it usually only exists at one time in one place, and you have one narrative, whereas cinema, which is non-static, can move around and tell lots of different stories and move from beginning to end with multiple viewpoints. And that's the challenge of how a painting can do something that a movie can do. In modern time, we're constantly confronted with multiple narratives, multiple events, all simultaneously happening at the same time. The period from 2015 to 2019 was a very tumultuous period, as has been the last year. And I found that the main thing that people were talking about was not one single event of tragedy or disappointment or something that was happening in the media or something that we were upset about. It was the accumulation of the stacking of all these things happening at the same time. Before you could get relief from one kind of event and move on to the next, something else was already happening before the other thing was resolved. And so what you were dealing with this constant stacking of all these things happening right on top of each other that you weren't able to process quick enough, especially not in one picture, one image. These narratives came from television, internet, film, music, and advertising. And through the news and other media outlets, these narratives also spun, redirected, slanted with the idea of truth about anything constantly in flux. And so when I started thinking about things, I was trying to use them the way in which we were getting overwhelmed with information, we were getting overwhelmed with violence, we were getting overwhelmed with trying to figure out the flux in our own identity and how different news outlets were spinning all this. how this could really lead to the construction of a painting that could solve all these things. At least I was hoping. So I talk a little bit about the other things that I wanted to put in here as my ingredients. I talked about saturated color. Uh, I've talked about layered images, multiple perspectives, representing the field being visually overwhelmed with information. Speed was a big part, having lots of things that moved in a way which mirrored or mimicked the speed in which media was giving us this stuff. Uh, I wanted to like think about an environment picture or a landscape picture that actually held content that wasn't seen just to be idyllic or beautiful, and that could I hide content in these places. I wanted to think about fracking, global warming, and radioactivity and water purity. These were all concerns. I also wanted to think about the contrast between needing energy and the conflict it creates with destroying where you live. I mean, we are consumers, so we do need energy, we do need power, we need all this stuff, but also too, we need the thing that's creating all this to also survive, so it can be our home. Um, I was also thinking about space a lot because you could get totally overwhelmed with all this stuff. And part of me thinking about space or dreaming about it was the chance to always kind of start anew, start fresh, and escape some of this stuff, especially when it got too heavy. So I started to come up with this idea of like this kind of cloud, because the idea of this cloud could do lots of things here, right? It could work on several layers and have several different metaphors. Clouds predict storms, which are tied to conflict and distress. They can reference comic books. Space clouds or nebulas represent creation and pure energy. And the idea of the online cloud, a place that stores information and unifies platforms. Here, information can be saved or discarded, lost but not totally lost. As consumers, this is what we're constantly doing with technology, whether in object or idea form. And I started to think about all the other things that held content for me and things that I consumed. And as now I was getting into my mid 30s, that how many things that I love so much that held information, that gave me information through gaming things, music devices, and things like that, were now kind of detritus. They were kind of retired and they were drunk or junk, and they kind of lost their place because they had been replaced by something else. They had become obsolete. And how the nostalgia of me with these objects as a consumer, but how this tied to my own history, how I had a longing for these things and thinking about all this. So these are two images I started to look at the very beginning when I was thinking about these ideas. One of the ways in which I do my process of kind of how I work is I will gather lots of source images that I will stare at for long periods of time. And ultimately, before I start painting or drawing, I will get rid of all of them so that when I draw them or try to recreate them, I inevitably always get it wrong, but kind of I get it wrong in my own way, which makes it original to what I'm trying to do. So the accidental process of messing up my source images by forgetting some aspect about them gives them a clumsiness that I can't replicate if I'm trying to do it on purpose. But these were two of my first starting images that I was looking at. And so at the end of like my interiors, exteriors, so this was actually the first kind of cloud painting I made. I took one of the environments here that I'd been doing in the series with two oil derricks there. It's kind of almost a symmetrical balanced composition, but with the path from the earlier photo that I showed you pulling out a little bit toward the left. My road as a person also, I'm a little bit more on the left, and I will try to walk towards the center, although that's a little tough. And around this, we have different things like hands and feet and stars. And this is very much kind of like a little attempt that's a little clumsy with fewer parts in them. But this is me also trying to negotiate how I was going to start building these compositions. And the greatest thing about this too is you can start to create a narrative about the figure, but in all these, you never really see the entire character behind the actions of all the stuff, which is kind of what I like because it creates this concept of kind of like the Wizard of Oz, where the man behind the curtain that you never see is really the person pulling and doing all the stuff. And this was another one I did later in that year. This is Riot Nimbus Peak. These have really kind of like go action, kind of just really simple word verb kind of direct titles. I wanted them kind of like that, really aggressive and abrasive. So you can start seeing more things I'm adding in here: pencils, bullets, candies. There's a lot of rocks and stones, different kind of symbols that start to get a little bit more aggressive. You'll see soldiers' boots and sometimes soldiers' boots with the toe coming out of it, kind of referencing, whether we put soldiers' feet on the ground or not, and if we're going to put them on the ground, if they're equipped enough, and other stuff like that. This is Nimbus Kick Stomp. Nimbus is just another word for cloud from 2016. So these are some of the ones I was starting to do at the beginning of the year. In here, I have a protest sign that's blank, bombs, pencils again. Pencils are great because they do two kinds of things, right? Pencils are sharp and can be used as weapons, but also two, pencils are creative things, which draw and design, but also two, they are important for writing bills. So the duality of a pencil as an image and it doing lots of things is very important. So I have rockets and rocks, a Confederate flag hat up here, and then a gun, and of course, different hands and feet, and all this is moving around. Part of the reason you can see these starting to warm up and get really busy, you'll see a lot of the different stuff that's repeated in almost all the paintings. But part of what I'm interested in more than just creating or putting different things in each painting is the sequence of how you read the painting different based on the arrangement of how you juxtaposition one thing next to each other. So if a gun is next to a rocket, that's next to a foot, that's next to a pencil, how you would read that. And one of the things that came out of this is I'd received a text from a student about something. It was one of my student leaders, and I said something back, and they sent me this emoji strand, which was like 8 emojis in a row, and I had absolutely no idea how to read it, but I was completely fascinated with it. And I said, what does that mean? And it was a really simple explanation that I just wouldn't have got reading the pictures. And I thought how interesting it was that, we had people basically of the younger generation that were using the phones to recreate a kind of very simple type of hieroglyphics. They were talking in pictured sequences. And so that kind of went into my thinking of the construction with how I was putting these together. This is Ignition, which is on the cover of the catalog for the show. Here's my one shameless plug. If you've been to the show and you like the show and you want to see a catalog of this work, there are catalogs for sale in the gallery. T-Mike will hook you up. This is the painting that's on the cover. In this one, sometimes I will pull back some of the elements just to really focus on the moving and explosion of the cloud. You can see also what's neat about this one is it is removed from the context of the landscape and is more just in a space of itself, kind of like the nebula picture that was there at the beginning. So I go back and forth between wanting to ground these in a landscape and wanting to pull them out. And also too, playing with the formal abstraction of just building up these shapes, which seem to be building, stacking, or exploding out towards the viewer. The challenge of these paintings, like I talked about earlier, was to move in the same way in which we were receiving information. So one, to be visually overwhelmed, but two, to deal with the idea of spin and how we're pushed around by the media to move in different ways. So when you see these, you kind of fall into the picture, you get spun around, but by the time you hit the center shape, because it is the lightest, it usually is trying to push you or force you back out of the picture. So we're not falling into these pictures in the same way in which you would fall into, let's say the School of Athens or a painting like that, that is a traditional kind of Renaissance step where there's a clear background, middle ground, foreground, and you just kind of walk into the picture like it's a window into the world. This is Open Carry Storms Vary from 2016. Once again, now the cloud becomes a little bit more unbalanced. You see things that I hadn't introduced, shotgun shells, wedding rings. These apples I start to put in, which are biblical in reference somewhat, with how much knowledge should we gain and just the core of like just throwing something out. So, kind of the information that we get and then what remains or what we do with that information once we've got it. Also, hands full of cash. We're consumers, so I like the idea of just like fistfuls of money, things like that. And this is my painting Shotgun Caesar Tempest. This is from Art of the South opening 2016, where I got the Best of Show Award and feature artist. And what was cool about this is Numbers Magazine has this show every year. They didn't have it of COVID last year, but they have it every year. And it's a really great survey of contemporary Southern art. And if you win the Best of Show, the award is that they do this feature with you and usually get interviewed by another artist. And the artist that interviewed me was Donna Mosley, Donna Woodley, sorry, who's a friend of mine now. And we just had a really good time talking and meeting. And had it not been for this, I would have got to be friends with her. But again, understand when I first started showing these paintings, in comparison to the narrative and figurative paintings I was doing before, it was not the quickest response. I think people didn't really quite know what they were looking at, especially compared to the work that I did previous. And I had a couple of comments that are like, I don't get exactly what you're doing. And when I heard those comments, I was kind of excited because I had felt too long before in my work, which I'd really liked before, but obviously that I was trying to move away from, is that I always felt like I knew what I was doing when I was making a painting. And I felt like I was getting too comfortable in the work that I made. And what excited me about these is that there was somewhat of a format of how to make them, but I never quite always knew how everything would come out, even when I was doing that. A lot of the drawings that I made, they're all in black and white. I didn't do any pre-color drawings, so a lot of the color decisions and things had to be either made or invented from previous painting history, meaning I had painted a section or a part of the thing before in a certain kind of palette, or that I had just to respond to the different elements in the painting itself. So there was an element of risk that were in these paintings that I hadn't had before, but also too, you're never quite seeing the entirety of the character or the main person that's in the narrative, and that was kind of hidden in disguise. So you couldn't lead on a central character in the picture. It had to really kind of exist in this accumulation of all these different elements. And for me, that was something that was exciting and scary too. This is one of the drawings. Usually how I work is I'll start a set of drawings and I will take the best drawings that I feel like that I could respond to and make a painting from, and then I'll move those aside and then I'll convert those into paintings. And this is one of my drawings from 2017, Age of Hands, Presumed Consumed Charcoal and Stonehenge Paper from 2017. And you start seeing a lot of different communication objects and things I was talking about, like old cameras, boom boxes, CDs, older TVs, and inner rings full of stuff that were in the previous ones. So as the imagery and the language advances, they gain more stuff or sometimes they lose more stuff, but it's also about the addition of sequencing these things and still having them on occasionally a landscape or a space where I can talk about some of this stuff. I was really convinced that the maximum when I was doing this work should have been, to make a great show, you don't need to have one example of 20 ideas. You need to have a lot of ideas, or sorry, a lot of examples of one really great idea. And so every time I would make a new variation or permutation of this idea, I would still find where there were more possibilities and places to go. And it's probably why I've made so many for so long. And this is Consumption Nation Boom from 2017. These are all charcoal and paper. They're not prints, they're drawings. And this is the painting version of that. So if I go back and forth, one of the nice things that happens is I have a black and white kind of structural composition to go from, but I really have no idea about the color decisions, or there's certain things that happen between the transition between the drawing and the painting to where I have to make decisions that I don't have figured out yet that are really fun and exciting to do. So that's the painting version of that drawing. By this time, as I kind of got this body of work going, it started to kind of take off and really getting a fun part. My little boy was now 3. This is a picture of my little boy Grayson. This is a picture of my wife Amanda. This is at a birthday party. I think it's important to include that stuff because a lot of my painting decisions and the work that I make is I think about being a father a lot. So my little boy is 3, and it's important to show that he's in a picture here, and he had an army hat on at the birthday party, which is very similar to some of the ones that I put in paintings. So I started to think about, with Grayson being 3, he's at the age 2 where play is an important component of identity, and how we form and we build masculinity in our culture starts with play. It starts with toys, it starts with games and things like that. So I become very aware of like how we played and how we talked about playing, and also too the toys and the things that we involved with, and how that at some point that was going to factor into the identity of who he was. And so these are 2 paintings that I kind of made based on this. This is the drawing of the painting, and this is the actual painting. This is Hats for Bats, the charcoal version, and then there's the painting version over here from 2017, 30 by 40 inches oil on canvas. And in here, I have a whole different set of hats that represent different identities in a culture that are considered masculine, right? I have a police officer, I have a soldier, I have a cowboy, I have this kind of rebel outlaw, kind of Southern lowbrow, racist kind of identity, which is a bad identity. It could also happen to somebody that lives in this environment. And over here in the bottom right here is I have his toboggan that he wore when he was 3 years old that is right next to this flame, because part of what I was thinking about is the time when he's a little boy is going to be very short, and soon that he's going to be a man, that I have to start thinking about these things. And then in here I have different things like And there's shotguns, and then there's coonskin tails, uh, and then there's baseballs and matches, and there's also things to deal with pills and vice and all the other bad things that can kind of happen. So I'm thinking about the duality of all this coexisting while I'm trying to, raise a little person. This is Towering Over. This is from 2017. This is a painted version of one of the drawings that deals with some of the content that I talked about earlier. And these are two more drawings. This is Probation Ignition Flash, charcoal and paper, and Public Housing Inflammatory, charcoal and paper from 2018. And both of these start to deal with the idea of like institutions. So instead of just having like arms and feet and objects come out of here, I'm starting to put institutions coming out. This is also the time where we're starting to get feedback from some of the DACA kids and the Dreamer kids. And also when we're starting to question some of the incarceration rates in institutions in the country. And also at the bottom of this drawing too, where when we have in urban cities and stuff like basic things like water, which I addressed in some of the fracking landscapes earlier, was not just a given kind of commodity that every person in that town or city had. I was thinking specifically about some of the problems in Flint, Michigan. So they have a pipe here that's burst and a faucet that's turning off, and instead of that, blood is just kind of oozing out. So it's a continuation of a lot of the same narratives that were there present at the beginning, but they start to accumulate and pick up other things because, like I said earlier, I don't know that a lot of things happen are really solved or that we've come to some kind of resolution with them. We just kind of move on. And so when all these things are left unresolved, that's the whole title and the idea behind the show, Ignition, is that eventually something is going to spark. And this is a painted version. This is Fenced, oil on canvas from 2018, which deals with how we use a post 9/11 fear mindset to also talk about prison defending and how we can just justify certain things when we're doing this. This is another painting from 18 called Media Keys. Again, it has a lot of different stuff that I like this communication device. I have TV, CDs, VCR tapes kind of moving around, boombox. I have a can, I have an old dial phone, cigarette butts and other things that are consumed in the middle, old cameras, keys, knives. There's the apple again, and different hands and soldiers kind of moving around. And then around the middle of 18, when I was thinking about a lot of these ideas, this is kind of when the idea of Me Too and a lot of the exposure started to come out. And what I was thinking about was how funny of an idea that Hollywood is with American culture, how Hollywood is supposed to reflect American culture, but the production of the Hollywood machine also too reflects some of the worst parts of American culture. So that we're putting in identity with what we see in movies and things like that, but the behind the scenes also are really kind of illuminating some dark truths. And so what I wanted to do is think about a simple construction. I never really ever used text in any of my work. It's just something that I've always kind of stayed away from. But here I kept thinking about the construction of the Hollywood sign at the beginning and how in its beginning, when they were putting it up, how abstract and kind of junky it was, like it looked like an old house that had been hit by a tornado or something, or an old drive-in theater sign that had kind of rotted away. And how around this, we then build all these different kind of institutions or ideas of like star power and celebrity and things like that. So I still have some of the other ideas that are sticking around in here, but you'll see that this starts to move into the idea of reflecting Hollywood as being another institution that I was critiquing, kind of like the prison system and some of the fences that I were talking about that represented border issues and Dreamer kids. And so I did two painted versions of that one drawing. This is unscripted, 36 by 36 on canvas from 18. And this is the version I did of it in 2019, which was completely different, with a different kind of color palette here. And this is another painting from 2019. This is American Reflector, oil on canvas. Deals with a lot of this stuff, but also too, I use a lot of ladders. I like the idea of a ladder being the idea of the social ladder, and that the promise of America was that if we had a high, middle, low social class, that through your lifetime you could climb up this ladder and that your kids would start on a higher rung. But sometimes you don't always see all the ladder. Sometimes you don't even start on the bottom rung of the ladder. You're on the ground next to it. And how that, certain times that our privilege and the luck of how and where we're born actually determines a lot more than our ability to climb any kind of idealized ladder, or if that ladder even exists anymore. I like the idea of roads and highways and travel. I hear a broken old kind of media camera here that's kind of shattered out. And then once again, all this is kind of moving around. And this is one of the last paintings that I'll end with here before I talk about something else. We do questions. This is Grayson Salvo Barrage. This was from 2019, some of the last paintings. I think this one's in the show too. And it deals with a lot more, you know, he's getting older, and this is him at Christmas with his Nerf guns, very excited. There's a lot of Nerf guns. He's not learned the lesson of not shooting his father in the face. He likes to do that, but he's a pretty good kid, but he gets excited about this. And so in here, I kind of revisited that theme, and, you know, I have bats and football helmets, and inside I have some of the toys from when he was earlier, little cap gun, a riding horse, his bottle, his baseball that he had, an artist hat, book and pencil. He likes to draw, football. But on the outside, larger ideas of masculinity with burning things down and riding, a bat, a beer can representing vice, a boot with a spur on the end of it, and a hand with a shotgun, with other vice, money, war, drugs, addiction on the outside. Because I'm still very aware that every time that my little boy gets older, eventually he's going to become a man, and then he has to choose his own path. And that on his way to finding out who he is, there's several roads that he could take, and that his past will inform his future and vice versa. And that it can be very dark and scary if we're not careful. Okay, that's it for like the work I went through. There's a lot, and I wouldn't take everybody through that, but one of the other things that I do that I'm really proud of is I'm the faculty advisor for the League of Striving Artists student art group. I hope that there's some Murray students here and that you guys are active in OMAS, because one of the most important things that you can do at this time is work with your faculty members and also work with each other. Your peer group and the faculty that you work with as an artist are the two most important factors, I would say, for your career and your well-being as an artist for the next 15 to 20 years of your life. Your peer group are going to move through the professional ranks with you. So you want to try to keep as many of these guys as you can in class, going to openings, producing work and doing good things, supporting each other, because as they do well, you would do well if you keep good relationships with them. And your, and your faculty, the people that actually do care about you, they're not there just to torture you. They're the ones that are going to keep looking out for resources and opportunities for you too. So keeping a good relationship with both of these people are possible and very important. The other thing that you want to think about too while you're doing this is in the community in which you live. You know, Murray is bigger than Martin, but we're in very same kind of, you know, rural towns that have universities, that have a very kind of like forward-thinking academic section of the town, and they have a very rural old kind of section of the town. And one of the most important things that you can do is give back creatively into the community and continue to build your audience. One of the things that I hear a lot by students is that they are frustrated all the time by the lack of opportunity that is in their community environment. And part of what I always say is, well, what you have to do is you have to have the responsibility of building an audience. If you're upset that there's not a big audience of people that support what you do, you need to meet them halfway, if not more, and start doing stuff to build that audience and build that community. So the easiest way to do that is working with people in the community, service projects, teaching outreach, meeting people, making connections with businesses and other entities that are maybe curious about supporting or working with the arts. And that also means sometimes taking on projects you normally wouldn't do and sacrificing a little time from your own work. I promise you in the long run that every service project that we've done since my time as being an advisor with the student organization has led to some great opportunity down the road for a student, almost everyone, because it's been a very important part of community building. And as we've done that, the people that we build community with have been extremely thankful and gracious back towards us. So, all right, that's all my slides. Thank goodness.
Thank you so much. So we should open it up to some questions. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, no problem.
So
should I bring my head back up? Am I a little screen on the side? There we go.
So yeah, we can type questions into the chat, or you can just unmute and ask questions. I'm sure we have some somewhere. Anyone want to start us off?
Well, I had a question, but I typed it in the chat, but I'm sure others would want to know as well where the Zoom would be posted, the recording of the Zoom.
Well, don't have any specifics for that yet. We just record all of our talks just to be on the safe side for anything were to come up and for educational use. So we'll work with Jason to find out what he would prefer and how that can happen for those that might be interested.
Yeah, I did leave a little answer on there that said, you know, it may be available in a temporary nature on the gallery's website. Or I think, Mike, you might use it for teaching. So, but it really is up to Jason where it ends up. So.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, whatever works, we can talk afterwards, get it worked out. What did you want to use it for? Did you just like it and you want to see it again, or?
No, I was gonna write a paper on it for class.
Okay, yeah, sure. We'll find a way to get it to you, Kayla. No problem.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I had a question.
Okay.
So I saw that in some of your art, you had influences from like 17th, 18th century painting. Are there any references to contemporary painting in your art or contemporary art as a whole?
Okay. Yeah, I would say, like, in what aspect? I would say that they're all references to contemporary art, but contemporary is such like a broad kind of, it's a broad kind of idea. So I just, could you be just a tad bit more specific?
Yeah, I guess maybe now that I look at my question, maybe contemporary wasn't the best word. But in a couple of your paintings, there are pictures of, you know, like men standing really proudly with the sort of like 18th century hairdo and clothes.
Oh, you're looking at the website at Older Paintings.
Oh, yes, I am.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. Those were a series of paintings that I was doing of different kind of like soldiers and things that were building these hypothetical narratives of like culture classes. So people from different time periods that represented power and leadership running into these other kind of like civilizations at other time, and the awkwardness of them just hitting each other at the same time. There's something about every kind of point of, and this was me kind of like questioning the idea of like colonialism and the beginning of like when cultures started to expand to other places. There's always this point to where there's a culture clash of two different civilizations, and they're both looking at each other trying to decide which one is the least or most primitive between them so that one could take advantage of each other. But in the paintings, when I was doing it too, it was also using a visual language that was trying to do the same thing. So a modern kind of abstract language sometimes would fight or collide with a more representational thing. And it was just about trying to find a way to make pictures awkward, but kind of like, you know, so you're like, I know how to paint this and I can paint like this, and I'm putting all this stuff together. And so there's no real story happening, although all these things are put together to like replicate a narrative. It's really just the awkwardness of a visual and conceptual collision of that idea, if that makes sense. So that's what makes it contemporary, is the fact that I guess I'm recontextualizing things from the past and putting them in a context in which they don't belong, at different time, at different place. And by doing that, I'm changing the narrative identity and power of what they represented before by taking them out of their context.
Thank you.
Is that a good answer without being too like art speaky? I'm sorry, but that's
No,
really what
that's
it
a
is.
good answer. Thank you.
Okay, I understand your question now, that which paintings you were talking about.
There are several questions that got posted in the chat. Let's see. So Jonathan asked, you produced a great number of pieces for the show. Is it a struggle to store them together?
Okay, well, one of the things that I talked about that was funny is as I started these, people work with their shows and exhibitions very different. Some people will hoard all their work and just do shows like this. As I make work, the last thing I want any piece to do is really just be sitting around. Because for me, it's not doing anything if it's sitting here. So when I was showing with REM, I say when I was because REM, Dana, my gallery director, just retired. So after 15 years, she shut the gallery down. But I had an appointment of a scheduled solo exhibition every 2 years. So I was at least always responsible for being ready for that solo show. And sometimes that show would go to other places. But in between, if I was done with work and it was ready and I felt like it was good, I was trying to get it in other places, other group shows, shows that my friends were putting together. If there was a good juried show that had a catalog and I liked the place or the institution, it was gone. So I'm always making, but very rarely has any of this work all been together. I mean, that's something that hasn't happened until COVID. So when T Mike talked to me about this, I told him, I said, this show at this size would have never happened had it not been for COVID, because since I started this body of work, they have never been all together. Coming to Murray and seeing them up, seeing like from 15 to 19, that is the first time I've seen one from every year together. It's never happened. I've never had them in the same place at the same time. So in every body of work I'm making, which is usually a big production in the summer, I'm making between 20 paintings and 10 to 15 drawings. So as I'm moving them, they're going all over the place. So it's a lot of work. I bet Mike and I, when we went and picked them out, there's still probably another 30 that we didn't even touch, that were just not as good as the other ones. Or I just felt like, these were probably the ones that I wanted him to kind of put the show together with. Which, Michael did an amazing job installing them and arranging them the way he did. But so now that the show will be over soon, having them all together, the stores will be an issue. But there's something that I did in 08 as an artist decision, and I hate to even say the word business in art, but as also a business decision, is that shipping went up and big work is really expensive to move and to travel. So for me, if I was able to make mid to moderate size work that really represented what I was trying to do as an artist, I would occasionally make large pieces, but I wasn't showing them because it's just, for me, it was too expensive to ship them. And they were also, large pieces get damaged. You're having to insure them, you're having to make sure the institution has insurance. So I had a lot of small, medium-sized work. I think the biggest paintings in that show were maybe 30 by 40. So for me, I could travel with that show. I can take a really good show in a Nissan Rogue and be pretty dangerous. And there's not a lot of artists that can say that. So no, it hasn't been an issue, but storage is. I mean, you have to think about scale and the way in which you work. And that's why I made that decision to move down after 08.
Thank
That's
you.
a long answer to your question. I'm sorry. So
I appreciate it.
yeah.
And luckily, some of the works are in collections.
Yeah. There's a lot that aren't here. So
Yeah.
a lot of the good drawings are gone and a couple of the paintings. So
There's another question, maybe from a different direction here,
okay.
from Corinne, and it's saying, when working on your cloud compositions, how did you decide the general sizing of your pieces? Did you ever consider working at a much larger scale?
Okay, well, this kind of ties to that, but I will say this. The one thing that I haven't done that I'm wanting to do when I get back on this is to make 3 or 4 extremely large ones that are kind of like tour de force big versions, especially now that we're kind of in this new transitional period in history with coming out of an election and a very kind of tumultuous kind of summer. Being on the other side of that and looking back, I want to make some big ones. The one thing that I knew for certain when I started is that they had to be squares. That for me to do the idea, they had to be in a square format, not a rectangle, not anything else. They had to be squares. And as I got comfortable with the way in which they were moving in the squares, I then moved to some vertical formats. But what I found was, as they started to get more vertical, like a couple of the 30 by 40s, if I wasn't careful, I would try to subvert them in the way into which the clouds themselves became figures, which was kind of the thing I was trying to avoid. I wanted to show bits and pieces of lots of narratives to tell a story, and I wanted to escape having one big character that was kind of the story. So it wasn't much of a matter of scales, it was format that squares were safer and worked better for what I was trying to do. But some big ones are
Okay,
coming.
thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Corinne.
All right, so there's another one. It says, did you ever have moments where the paintings felt like they were predicting the political weather and climate?
Yes. The goal, there's a great saying, and I thought about this a lot, especially when looking at the paintings, especially after this past summer, is that the problem with being ahead of your time is by the time everybody else catches up, you're bored. I could see, even as early as the end of 15 and 16 in the transition, a distinct change in the way in which people were reacting to things. I don't know if it was the speed or the accumulation of all this stuff or what it was, but I could see a big storm coming. I don't want to be literal about what I'm making and be cheesy and say I could see a big storm coming, but part of the idea that these were like storm clouds and they looked the way they did and they were violent and they're bloody and they're aggressive is because I just saw it coming. I just heard too many conversations. An artist is really kind of a barometer for things. We're very attuned to like good and bad stuff. We have, big feels, we kind of respond to that. And then these paintings were really a litmus test. You can take one of these paintings out of this group and show it to one person on the left and one person on the right, and it could be a justification for both people. And so what I was trying to do as I'm painting this is I was trying to really get to a place of, this is just what it is. This isn't me just critiquing something. I had my own reasons and rhyme and reasons and thinking about how to get to the image. But once I could get to the image and create it, I didn't try to make the work too substantive in one way to push. It was really just representing, here's a litmus test. This is what I think is happening. And yeah, a lot of it happened. A lot of the dialogue happening and it's still happening. So yeah, it's bizarre and it's eerie. I think Mike and I talked about it when we packed the work in the cold, that it's like, isn't it weird when like you do a show and all of it comes true? Yeah, I mean, I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing. I just knew that I could feel it and see it coming. So.
All right. So there are several questions here. So I'm going to just ask another. Do you feel like the things that have happened since COVID in the world will inspire you as an artist to capture something about this moment in your work?
Well, I don't know that it'll be in this format, but I did make a body of work during quarantine that is a body of still life paintings that are all kind of about a big orange unraveling next to a lot of peaches. And if anybody wants to go look, they were called Sequestering Still Lives and Other Views from the Plaza. And you can figure out what the plaza is, and you can figure out what the unraveling orange is, and you can think about the period of March to November, and that will explain all the paintings. But they're really just a bunch of still lives that talk about that time, because when we got all the clouds together and it stopped, my mindset when COVID started was completely different. We were inside all the time. I was thinking about interiors. I was looking at the space in my house a lot. I was looking at walls and architecture and, do we have enough food? Do we have fruit for Grayson? I was thinking about, what if the store shut down? I mean, there was a lot of like hypotheticals and ifs when this started. So it was really weird that I just kind of left those cloud paintings and let that idea sit for a minute, because it was just a complete change of thinking. And to just keep thinking or to keep making work like that and not be thinking of it was just really to be doing some exercise in mimicry. And I just didn't want to do that. I felt like I wanted to make these paintings. I was really goofy and self-conscious, but I kept telling man, I was like, I'm painting these still lives that are about this big orange that's unraveling and da-da. And I said, do you think people will get it? And I said, oh, who cares? You got to, I said, I got to make them. So I did make those, and I wish, feel free to go look at them. They're on the website, and let me know what you think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. All right, so what advice would you have for other artists creating work about environmental concerns or contemporary issues?
I think here's what you have to do in any kind of research where you're talking about something political or environmental, is that you need to research just enough to get to the creation of the work. One of the things that I've seen from a lot of artists that do either political work or they do environmental work or they do work about a cause is that they spend all their time consumed with the research about it to the point to where they don't ever make work. They end up becoming the best expert on the issue. I think you need to do just enough research, and I hope this doesn't sound irresponsible, but it's really just what I found that has worked. You need to do enough research to get you instigated or motivated or inspired enough to make a work that takes a stance or a point right then and there. And it doesn't mean that you can't be uninformed later. A lot of what you're going to talk about, whether you're making political work or environmental work, is going to happen when you're next to the painting, talking about it in a conversation. And a lot of it won't have to do with the work. It'll have to do with the issue. But you have to be reminded too that the fact is you are making an artwork that also is present as an object in a place. And if you don't put enough consideration in that, you're a journalist. And if you want to be a journalist, there's nothing wrong with that, but you can't be a journalist to the point to which you're ignorant and you completely abandon the thing that you're making. Because I've seen a ton in the last 5 years of really bad political art that is basically a ton of journalism and very little craft or consideration for the thing that's being made or presented. And I just think if you're going down that field, whether it's that or it's environmental art, that's an issue and that's a thing that you've got to watch. And that's really, a point of just kind of self-control. That might make sense. I don't know. I hope it does. It's just what I found that works.
Right. And then we have a question about, I guess it's more on your website where there's phase 1 and phase 2.
Yeah.
Was there a reason for the transition and what inspired that transition in phase 1 and phase 2 cloud paintings?
I felt that the first ones were kind of nice, but I just kind of lumped them in that because there's some really great paintings in phase 1, but it was really just, I was trying to figure out or learn how to make them. And then phase 2, I knew what I was making, so they grew a little bit different. And so it just really kind of felt like one big body of work, but set up in 2 phases. This is me negotiating how to make these, and this is me having negotiated how to make these, stretching the content up. That's all.
Let's see. All right, so you had mentioned, and I guess so did I whenever we were in the introduction, where you were represented by some galleries. So there's some questions about, like, did the galleries reach out to you? How did you find the galleries? How did they find you? And do you have any tips for artists looking to get their work out there visible and within galleries?
The longest gallery relationship that I ever had was with REM Gallery in San Antonio. I went to grad school there. When I had my graduate show, I think the main thing that you want to think about first is you want somebody to be connected to your work, regardless of if it's selling or doing anything else or justified by anybody else first. And so I'll tell you this story and hopefully it'll make sense. In graduate school, when we would have our graduate show, your big master thesis show, we had this place that was called the Satellite Gallery, which was downtown San Antonio. And you would get a Thursday preview opening, which was a small group of people. You would have a first Friday opening and then a Saturday day brunch thing where you could bring people back and kind of meet with them. Dana Reed, who ran REM and who I showed with for 15 years, came that Thursday night when nothing had sold and nobody was saying anything about my graduate work and said, I really like these. I like what you're doing. It doesn't look like other stuff. I like the risk you're taking. I see a future for you. I think you'll be able to develop this. When you get done with this, you'll get other offers. Let me know. I'd like a chance to show you. Well, the next Friday, I had all these people come and a lot of other gallery people, and they just didn't really have much response. They didn't really know what it was looking at. This work was really, really aggressive Southern. I mean, flying rednecks and Ghost of David Crockett, just all kinds of wild stuff. And they really just had no interest. That Saturday in the morning, I started selling a lot of work. So by the time the Saturday night show happened, I'd sold 13 pieces out of my thesis show. Well, all the galleries that had passed on that Friday came back once they heard stuff was selling and, kind of like redistributed their offers to me. So I ended up just going with Dana because she was the first person that came in there and said, I like this before anything had kind of like sold or anything else. And I trusted the fact that She liked it without bias. And what happened is that she was the only gallery out of all those galleries to survive the '08 crash. And I showed with her up until 2019. So the fact that, I made that choice with having what I thought was the right kind of relationship with my work also ended up being the right relationship with the gallery. I think if you're going to show with a gallery, what you've got to be prepared to do is you've got to produce. It's not good enough just to be a good artist. There's a ton of great artists out there, but you've got to be able to produce a body of work. And if you're going to show with them long term and they're a good gallery, you've got to be able to produce a body of work consistently every 2 to 3 years. And that's not for everybody. And unless you have a relationship with them where you only show every 5 or whenever you get a new body of work, if you're in a gallery kind of setup or stable of artists, that's really how it works. I think what you have to do as a young artist is you need to be invested in other artists. You need to be going to openings. You need to be meeting older artists, learning from them. You need to be inviting people to your studio, and you better have a body of work, because there's nothing more frustrating for an older artist, which is going to a younger artist studio and looking at 3 things. I mean, what are you going to do with 3 things? And so I will say this, I touched on it earlier. You don't have to, at this age, have 20 different great ideas before you make a body of work. You need one solid idea and you need 20 examples of it. That is the best way to do this, because the evolution of what you do happens in the evolution of making a body of work. It's not conversational, it's not conceptual. In the making of a body of work is what's going to grow you the most, because you're in your practice. And the make has to be the best part. Gallery stuff and shows and exhibitions and talks like all this is fun, but the most exciting part about being an artist for you had better be when you're in the studio making. For me, that's as good as it gets. Like Netflix, music, a Diet Coke this big, and 8 hours. I mean, for me, that's the best part. That's what I like. So, I mean, if you're not built like that, or you're not yet, I mean, it takes a little bit, wait until you are, because otherwise, maybe the gallery thing isn't for you. Maybe you need to be doing it a different way. Maybe you're a single piece grants writing kind of artist here and there. I mean, it's just different strokes. So
you sort of touched on this a little bit, being so prolific. There's a few questions about artist block. So do you ever get artist block for as much as you produce? And if
yes,
if you
I'm
do or don't,
getting
what
through a
suggestion?
really weird one. It's not really a block. It's trying to find like exactly where you want to go. And I just also always tell myself, you have to, for me, I'm a painter. So this is what I say. It's like, I need to go through and paint all the bad paintings so I can get back to making the good ones. You can have an idea. It doesn't always mean that it's going to work out, but a lot of accidents that happen in the process of making bad work has been some of the best innovations or breakthroughs that I've ever had. Philip Guston, there's this great interview where Philip Guston is in, and it's not the MoMA, but it's some gallery. Maybe it is the MoMA. This is when they let you smoke in there, and there's a group of all these students, and he's smoking in his very Guston-y way, and he's leaned over, and he just looks Guston cool, and they're asking him what's different from what you're painting now versus 35 or 50 or 60, and he's talking about years, and he's telling him that nothing is different, that the trick is you just have to find a way to keep going. And that's all you're ever trying to do as an artist. You're just trying to keep going. You're just trying to get through to the next thing. You're trying to make the next thing. And then sometimes in that, there's going to be stuff that's not so good, or maybe that you're not as excited talking about. But the whole trick to it is you just keep going. And so, yeah, I mean, there's been work that I've looked at. I was like, wow, that was a really awkward, terrible 2 years. But I can also look what came after that and said, I couldn't have got to this had I not made this in this year. So I think you spend a lot of time working through bad work to get back to good work. Some people are really methodical and completely remove themselves from the process and try to do it like a poet or a writer. And that's cool, but I'm not a poet or a writer. I'm a painter. So my idea is you just, pardon the expression, you just paint through that shit until you get back to something good. I just think that's how I do it. So.
Well, we have a sort of a follow-up to that is, how do you determine what's good and bad in your process of elimination?
Well, I think that's the whole point of showing. I don't really know what's good and bad. When I've had like a show like this of 20 of these, people will come up to ones that I don't think and just like it. And I almost despise it. You know, like, and the ones that I usually like out of the group, most people don't respond to. And so the whole point of doing exhibitions and entering shows and doing stuff like that is to really kind of see what the barometer of your work is outside of yourself, because you do need that. You're making work for other people or an audience, whether you're paying attention to that or not. I mean, that's what you're really doing. So to be blocked off and say, I only make work for myself. I hear people say that all the time. I was like, that's ridiculous. I make work because I enjoy making work, but I'm not ignorant to the fact that it is at some point going to leave me and be at the mercy of an audience that I might or might not be with. And really, they're going to determine whether it survives or not. I mean, at any point, don't anybody do this, but it's amazing when you go into a gallery and that somebody doesn't just walk up and start destroying stuff if they hate it. That's a real possibility. It's a very sublime thing to walk into a gallery with artwork that is basically protected by, you know, maybe a 20-year-old college that has a college student that has a work study that's not going to stop you if you start. They're just going to call somebody else. So it's at like, it has to survive and exist on its own. So you don't really control that. So I don't know. I think other people decide that ultimately. And if they're not making any decisions on whether it's good or bad, it's usually maybe not there. I'll just say that. Don't think so much about good or bad as like, is it there with where your idea is? Because you can have good work that's not there, that's just ends up not being great, but it's not really bad. It's just not there yet.
All right, so we're getting close to time. So there is a question here about many of your pieces have the oil field or an abstracted tree line landscape as the ground or background, or the outer space look, or a bit of both. Do you ever imagine just the clouds themselves or other specific types of landscapes or scenes for these situations or others?
You know, I really think of landscape in the way in which I think of landscape paintings. I don't spend a ton of time outside of like outer space pictures, like of nebulas and space clouds, which I really love. I think they're beautiful. You know, there's a little bit of pointillism and field abstraction in all of them. But, you know, I really, when I think of landscape, my landscapes are very, very, I think, artificial. And like I said, post Mario Brothers, you know, they very much feel like they're trying to make an organic representation of something that maybe came out of a game at one point. Because that's a generational thing with me. You know, I grew up playing Nintendo and stuff like that. So I don't really think of like that. There's never going to be a point where I'm going to talk about when I spent 4 weeks at the Grand Canyon learning from these landscapes. That's just not what I am. I'm really painting the idea of a landscape and then trying to personalize it for me from there. So I'm starting in an impersonal place and trying to personalize it. Probably not the other way around.
All right. Well, thank you, Jason. I mean, if there's any last questions, we have time for another, or we're getting pretty close to time though. Just want to give somebody a last second opportunity.
I give a shout out to all the stouts that are here. I see a lot of my brothers and sisters from places. I didn't see, yeah, sweet. That's awesome.
Yeah, the Zoom connection is nice. So we, you know, if you're just in a lecture room, you don't get not everyone can travel to you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's, you know, it's got its ups and downs, you know, it's positives and negatives to being in the virtual realm. But it is nice to, you know, have some of that distant connection get a little closer and be able to observe.
Cool.
And,
hey, there's Trisha Guy. Hey, Trish. I've seen a lot of these people in a while. That's cool.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
All right. Well, I just want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. Thank Jason so much for being so welcoming to the idea of this show and the selection process and you know, just being able to come join us through Zoom and share your experience and your process and thoughts on the work. But yes, the show is still open. We're just having an artist talking event here. So make sure that if you have an opportunity to come see the show, it's open through the 17th of February in the Claire Amico Gallery. So yes.
Thanks,
Thanks so
Jason.
much.
I appreciate it. I wish I could get there, but South Carolina is a little bit far.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll be able to bring the show there, right?
Exactly. That's what we're
Yeah.
working on.
Perfect.
Excellent.
Definitely.
Well, we have a few walkthroughs online and can probably do a couple other virtual tour simulations for those that can't be at the gallery. So
Nice. Okay.
all right. Well, I just want to thanks everyone again. Thank you, Jason, and
Thank
we'll
you,
let
guys.
you get on with your evening. Hopefully, you're not going to be involved in this potential ice storm like we are, but here at
Let's hope
Murray,
not.
What's that? What's ice?
exactly. Hopefully, we don't find out either.
Take care. Thanks, guys.
You guys.